Hey everyone, this is Travis with Apropos Book. I am here with Tim Facciola to talk about his awesome epic fantasy, how he got into writing. Tim, do you want to take a minute maybe to introduce yourself to everybody?
Absolutely. Well, Travis, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. Yep, as Travis introduced, I'm Tim Facciola. I write epic fantasy. I also like to help epic fantasy, and not just epic, but I like to help fantasy authors learn a system for crafting their own first drafts. But storytelling has always been a passion of mine, and I like systems and I like structure, and it all kind of like my day job is in fitness, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, and how structure there helped me create structure in storytelling. And I just have a passion for finding those patterns and using that to tell stories that hopefully impact readers in meaningful ways.
Awesome. So, but you didn't start out with actually writing fiction or novels. You started out with lyrics from a pop punk band.
Yeah.
How did that transition even happen? Like, how did you decide, hey, I want to write epic fantasy?
So no, it certainly wasn't like a wake up one day and so here's the thing. The band broke up. Our drummer quit, and we went through a series of trying to find another guy to fit in, and then the one guy who had a lot of interest kind of fell off. He got a girlfriend. You know how these things go. So I was like, I didn't feel I had the musical ability to tell the stories I wanted to tell in the way I heard them in my head. So I was like, what is a medium that I can do all on my own? Wrong. What is the store creative outlet that I can do in my New York City apartment, not make noise? That part was correct, other than a little bit of yelling at my characters every once in a while. And then what is something that I can do that won't cost me more money? And that's where I was really big wrong. Really wrong about that one. But that was kind of I needed a creative outlet. And I wanted to do something that I can do on my own, in which no one else could quit on me, and I'd still be able to keep moving forward. I always had a passion for stories. Like as a kid, I used to like write creative. I loved creative fiction. But I hadn't really flexed that muscle in a long time. And this was when I had been listening to the Game of Thrones audiobooks, and I was like, I would love to do something like this. So that was kind of where it kind of launched. And I haven't looked back.
You know, it's so funny. I tried to listen to the audiobooks of Game of Thrones, and I had such a hard time with it. And I think it was because the narrator, and I noticed that he would change how he pronounced some of the main characters' names like frequently. And I'm like, oh, this is even more confusing because he's already got like 10,000 characters. And now you're adding in new ones. So that's it's interesting to me that, you know, pop punk to fantasy. How do you feel like, what similarities do you think exist between what you were doing with lyrics and what you're doing now with fiction?
So as I mentioned earlier, there's patterns. There's almost like this Fibonacci sequence of like underlying structure to like all things. And I like finding that and then leveraging that. So I think, listening to, specifically within pop punk, like structurally, they're all kind of paced the same way. They all kind of have the same, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, second verse, pre-chorus, chorus, bridge, double chorus. Like it's almost like this is the pattern. Yep. It's going to be. And I think that I fell into like, okay, this is like the basic storytelling structure for this. But then when I started reading, especially like big epic books, like a Game of Thrones or the Song of Ice and Fire, like really complex storytelling, I was like, is there still a pattern here? And there is. And it's just, I think on the small scale of a 3-minute song versus the large scale of a 55-hour audiobook or a 1,000-page tome that Brandon Sanderson's writing, it's if you understand the pieces to pick up and identify, it does kind of follow a similar structure. And that is, I'd say, what was most profound about it, and most like the skill set translated better than I would have thought. It totally different way, but it began in a very similar fashion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think it is really interesting when you're reading, you're able to pick up on those things. Like, every once in a while I have this moment like, okay, why are they talking about this? There's a reason they're mentioning this. And, so it's fun to pick apart when you can notice those patterns. But like we discussed in your intro, this isn't the only thing you do. You're also a virtual fitness instructor, and you use medieval weapons to help unlock your inner gladiator. When I was forming these questions, I had this thought, like, how often in the middle of a session where you're like, wait a minute, that would be really, like, how often do you get inspiration? And maybe what was the weirdest one?
So, and this has evolved, right? Like, this has changed over time. It used to be all the time. It would, like, I would be, I'd mid-set be like, nope, got to stop and like get my phone out and like start typing notes. Because there was something about movement that unlocked creativity, especially moving creatively. So a lot of like flow-based exercise where it's a little less structured and almost dance-like. It kind of unlocks a piece of my creative, it unlocks like creative side of my brain. But it's very reactive. I'm reacting to a 25-pound mace that's swinging around my head. I can only guide it. It has too much leverage for me to control. So there's this give and take with that dance. And I do think that translated to the give and take that is required when I'm a big plotter, but I need to kind of move and react with my characters as they start exploring the space that I've plotted out. So oftentimes the revelations would be stuff like less the actual combat flow and the choreography that I would that would be like, I'd be writing, be like, wait, how would this work? And I'd pick up like a sword and be like, okay, and like almost act it out. But when I'm working out, the revelations are usually the softer side of, well, what would this character be feeling having to react to these circumstances? And so it was more of like the emotionally driven side of it, which I find interesting. The most like wild one, without spoilers, was the idea to give a redemptive arc for one of my villains, who was really set up to be like irredeemable. And I was like, could I set this up in a believable and cathartic way that would actually resonate with readers, where I get them like one of my reviews most recently was like, the real enemies to lovers is the reader's relationship with this character. And I loved it. I was like, I did it. To create that type of emotional arc over the course of a trilogy. So I'd say that idea, I can remember, that was, I was doing a type of rope flow, and you're whipping this rope around. It's moving really quickly. It follows a lot of the same kind of pathways that like steel mace flow would, but it's happening much faster. And therefore, like a very little rotation of the wrist, for example, and you have to be ready because it's coming right back around. There's much less reaction time. And it whacked me right in the shin. And I had this like, what if I pivoted? because like everything that I had seen in terms of and been taught was you are static, rope moving around you. And I was like, well, what if I use the pathway of and do a 180? What happens then? And that kind of unlocked a whole new thing. But that, in my weird brain, made sense to what if I took this character that's facing this way and took all that energy, all that passion, and they just reoriented and faced a different objective or a different opponent. And that became a whole character arc.
I love that. And so as a writer, I'm sure that you have a different relationship to these villains that people hate than what the reader does. But how difficult was it for you to take someone that's, so detestable, but flip them around and then make them someone that people root for?
So and this is like a very not so typical thing, especially within the publishing industry, but I had the benefit of writing books 1, 2, and 3 of the Vengeful Realm trilogy before I published book 1. So I had the ability to, while drafting and plotting out book 3, to be like, how can I set this up subliminally in book 1? So that even though there's all this, like, I want you to despise this person, still have these little glimpses of humanity that I'm guiding you to overlook now, but I'm also going to elevate and kind of shine a light on later that has been there from the beginning, but you overlook it. So when teaching, like when working with new writers, like one of the things one of the images I kind of create for them is, in the medium of the written word, if you almost think about guiding your readers the same way a cameraman would in a film, like, yes, there's this whole set, but what the camera zooms in on, what the camera focuses on, that's what you as the writer, you have to guide the reader to focus in on these things. So if I want it to be apparent, I can make it apparent. If I want it to be subtle, I can make it subtle. But like you said earlier, if something is there, it's intentional, it's purposeful, it has a place there for a reason. So I am very intentional about what I'm creating and why. So injecting those little breadcrumbs early definitely made it easier for me to set up later. But then what was it like for me to create that arc? There was definitely a degree of fear. I was like, did I accomplish this? How will people respond to this arc? Will they get it? And thematically, it works so well. It's called the Vengeful Realm. If you can imagine, vengeance is kind of the way of the world. It's the status quo. So there's almost like a meta identity within it of, can you, the reader, learn not to seek vengeance even on this character? So it's like a very weird, it just happened. You know what I mean? Like, as much as there is intention behind it, sometimes things just happen, and just like a mace coming around, you have to react and pivot and be like, yeah, this is actually exactly where I needed it to go all along. So there's a magic that comes with that.
I love that analogy of, the mace coming around, because it really is very much like you can set it in motion, but you're not, and if you try to control the trajectory, it oftentimes does not turn out well. So it is really interesting to put it that way, because it's so true. So outside of fitness and maybe Game of Thrones, what kind of inspiration is behind it? There's a lot of times mythology and historical events will influence a writer's work. What do you think was inspiration for you?
So there's 3 big storytelling seeds, I would say, that really gave A Vengeful Realm the life that it has lived. So one was Spartacus's rebellion from Rome. So gladiator slave rises against the greatest empire the world has ever known during a time of turmoil, and it doesn't work out so well for Spartacus. But I was like, well, what if Spartacus had magic? Okay. And then what if instead of, let's add in some like Greco-Roman myth of, if you're familiar with the God of War video games from the PlayStation 2 era, where
Yep.
Kratos is leading in like this one-man wrecking crew against the gods of Olympus. So what if instead of rebelling against Rome, it was rebelling not just against Rome, but the gods that give Rome the power that Rome has over the people. So those were like the first two seeds. So we have Spartacus, we have some Greco-Roman mythology and Kratos' rebellion in God of War. And then the third thing I would say is the political intrigue and the scheming and the backstabbing of stories like A Song of Ice and Fire, because I really liked that storytelling, like the angles of perspective that allow you to look at things differently. I wanted to write characters that when you were in their head, you're like, of course they're right. Of course they're right. But once you're in the diametrically opposed character's head, you're like, oh, but I see your point, but and I love I really subscribe to the notion that stories are meant to encourage us to ask the right questions, not necessarily give us the answers. So if there's such value in, perspective, if becoming a better relational human revolves around the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, why not use a lot of different characters and a lot of different perspectives from a lot of different backgrounds and let that human experiment take place on the page? How are they going to respond? So those were like the big inspirations, and just weaving them all together. And now you have a Vengeful Realm.
So in the scales of balance, Zephyrus, is that how you pronounce it? Oh, good on me. Zephyrus has this profound journey of self-discovery. What kind of approach did you take when creating that? And what did you hope readers would take away from that journey?
Sure. Yeah. So Zephyrus's journey, I would say his story, even though he's like the main character, was the hardest to write. Especially since like the trope of the amnesiac is hated. It's despised in publishing, right? And so I was like, but what if it was done in a way that allowed the reader to impart a bit of themselves onto this almost blank page character? This character doesn't know the world, sure, but that also frees him up, not having any predispositions, no biases, no critical judgments, so it's all based on his own principles. So that was kind of what I hoped to. As an adult, you don't really get don't really get the opportunities unless you actively take them to look at, why do I do the things I do? Why do I believe the things I believe? That's very unnatural. Like inertia is so humans like inertia. Body in motion will stay in motion. Like body at rest will stay at rest. Like we stay on the path that's been set out for us until something forces us to make changes. Very often those things are really bad. Like those invitations come at such a cost. So what if a character offered readers the opportunity to ask themselves, what do I value? This is what is, but why do I accept what is? How would I respond in this situation? And that was like with all my stories, I like to have almost this exploration into the human condition, and some aspect of psychology, and so it required a lot of studying to understand, like, what would a person in this space feel like? What would they grasp onto? How willing would they be to jump at the first thing that kind of offered them some sense of stability.
Yep.
And how difficult would it be to see that offering of stability and reject it for something better, to believe and strive for something that could be, that isn't. So I think Zephyrus's character, Zephyrus's journey in particular, was really challenging because I wanted it to be a blank slate enough that people could impart themselves into his journey, while also being a chosen one type character that subverted a lot of the expectations of the chosen one.
So there was an element of research that went in to make sure that you got his journey correct. But were there any similarities between his journey of self-discovery and your own journey of self-discovery that you've been through?
I would say all 7 of the point of view characters, absolutely, in different aspects. Relationally, I don't think there's one single page of the story where a part of me isn't put on the page. Now, I was very intentional about not doing that. I was like, these characters are not based on anyone in my life. These events are not based on anyone. But like, I don't believe that, especially with a first story. I think the story on your heart is there for a reason, and it's begging to be let out. So it was very therapeutic for me to write this story. And that is because, very much so, the answer is yes. I think Zephyrus in many ways is who I want to be, in terms of being willing to make the hard questions about why are we doing the things that we're doing? Why are we on this path? That I was the why kid. Like, why, Dad? Why? Like that was just to an annoying degree. But I think there's a, as we grow and want to be accepted, we stop asking questions. I think it's like when people remain inquisitive through adolescence and into adulthood, and you retain that childlike wonder, but also that like teenage angsty willingness to challenge systems, it creates opportunities for growth and evolution. And I think Zephyrus has the courage to be what I want to be. Whereas Layden, one of the other main point of view characters, while noble and honorable, still plays within the rules of the failing system to the point that it holds him back, holds growth and development and progress back. So I think there's different aspects of me in all of the characters, the highs and lows, because, that exists on a spectrum. Like, there are times where Zephyrus is going so far out of bounds that he's not going to be able to help anyone because it's too revolutionary. That's not the way to go about it. But Layden is almost too much on the other side of the spectrum, where it's like, but what would happen if? And so those 2 characters in particular, I would say, who I am, who I want to be in different aspects of my life. But relationally, all the secondary characters, I'm like, oh, well, yeah, that could be this relationship that I had, or that could be, this relationship that I've observed in other people. And I think the more I got through, not necessarily the writing process, but the editing process, the audio recording process, I was the more exposed to my own story. I was like, oh, wow, actually, that's I see more. There's more layers to this than I'd originally believed. So I thought that was a really cool, like, reflective opportunity, because we talk about Zephyrus's self-discovery. I didn't realize that Zephyrus would be helping me in the self-discovery now. It wasn't like I was writing it like, oh, I'm going to show him how to self-discover. It was like he was showing me how to like recover aspects of that lost identity.
You bring up a point that I hear a lot of people talk about, and I've experienced myself, and it is very much the feeling that I get from what you're saying is it's very much like the characters are speaking through you rather than you telling the story. They're telling you and you're dictating it. Is that, you feel that as well?
Yeah, and that's where I think I wouldn't say it's like all that. I think there's a give and take. I think there's the opportunity for a give and take of that reactive relational coexistence between, because yeah, the characters are willing to lead if you let them. You can't let them run away with it, because it might, one, just like Zephyrus, it might be too out of bounds and not really have the effect that you're going for. And I'd say, the scales of balance is aptly named, because that has been like trying to find balance, but whether it's work-life balance or when and how to set boundaries with people. Like, these are hard scales to balance. And so I definitely do think, though, that the characters will speak if you let them, but you have to almost, as the creator, to allow that to come through authentically. You have to bare your soul. You have to be willing to be vulnerable to create that intimacy with that character, because it's the character who's going to have the capacity to create that intimacy with the reader.
Yep.
So if I'm too walled off, like, I don't want to go there, because that would rub up on my pain. Well, then the character is not going to be able to communicate that to the reader, and we're just going to be left with a pretty stale, distant, emotionally bereft story.
Yeah. And I like that too, because it reminds me of something I'd heard from Anne Rice once, where she said, write from the pain, or write from where, it hurts. And so it is really interesting that you said that. Well, speaking of vulnerabilities, was there one specific point in the process where you felt particularly vulnerable, and how did you move past that?
With help, with building a support system, and therapy. Particularly the latest book, which was the prequel, Ghosts of Rainier. Like, that story, I actually had asked a therapist, like, hey, would you be willing to write a foreword for this story? Because, like, it deals with death. It deals with unmet expectations, generational trauma, family curses. And it does so in a world where there really isn't a lot of time, opportunity, or willingness for forgiveness or reconciliation. And this was, I was writing this story while my mother was sick. And that was, and I was coming off of, like, it was her illness that actually brought me back into the family, because there was like a degree of estrangement prior to that. So you want to talk about writing your pain. It was like, I think during the drafting process, I was so detached that I didn't realize, oh my God, I'm telling this story. I'm telling these relationships in a way that, like, an unwillingness to, like, there's a father-son dynamic where there's an unwillingness for the father to let the son make mistakes that the father doesn't want to make, but the son is doing so just to be close to the father. And it's like, there's so many, like, little things that I wasn't intentionally doing, but then having finished the drafting process, I was in therapy at that point. My mom had passed at that point. There was a lot of unpacking that went into, and realizing, like, this is why this story was so hard to write, because I was just dumping my heart onto the page. I was dumping my situation, my circumstances onto the page. But now it's the burden of responsibility to organize this in a way that effectively tells the story and makes something beautiful out of this pain that I went through. And that's where, like, I think unpacking in therapy and having a support system with my wife, and reconnecting with my family, and All of these elements went into creating an editing plan that really allowed to set up for that emotional catharsis that I wanted to plant the seeds that would grow into that thematic development of hope through the darkness that I wanted to craft in the story, and that at times in the drafting process, I personally didn't have, but wanted to believe in. So making sure that all of that came to the surface and was clear and present throughout, even at a subliminal or underlying level. I wanted to make sure that was there. And, you know, having a team, having editors, having readers, having the people who care enough about, who know the writer, who know the creator, and understand the creative purpose and intention, that's invaluable. When I'm teaching my writers, the first module in my course is, you know, author identity. You know, who are you before anything else is? What happens before you're writing? Because you can't lose sight of that, because those things are often going to be attached to the support systems that are going to help you actually bear your pain, tell the story you want to tell, because it's not an easy journey. Aside from the emotional outlets of you know, fiction, of writing fiction, it's a long journey. It takes a lot of time and energy and input. So building out that support system, I think, is huge. And that is very much a reason why I think this story was as successful as I aimed for it to be.
I'm very sorry to hear about your mom, as I lost my mom as well. So I understand it's very, very difficult. But it's good to hear that, you know, you found a way to work through it, you know, that's beneficial to you and helpful. So in your books address a lot of human rights issues, systemic racism, classism, nationalism. What motivated you to weave these themes into your narratives?
So I'm very fortunate. I'm very, very blessed in the sense that I get to, in my fitness day job, I get to work with a lot of really great people. And one such person was heavily involved in the civil rights movement and still is, but like his family was in it very near and dear. And just like through natural conversations, the things that would come out and the things we would get talking about, I realized that messaging is so important. Storytelling, you can't convince someone of the failings of society if culturally they've attached their identity to the opposite.
Yeah.
The inhibitions are too strong. The walls that are up will shut it down and you'll never make any headway. But art has the ability to do that in a way that advocacy sometimes fails. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the role in, you know, that I felt like I can help here. I can do something here. And I can do so in a way that might reach the harder to reach people. Because if you have someone turn on the news and they're only going to turn on one of two types of news at this point, right?
Yep.
Otherwise, they're in an echo chamber and they're not going to be willing to hear the other side. Mm-hmm. So, and once upon a time, that was a matter of, you know, what side of the issue are you on? Now it's a matter of what facts do you believe? And it's a whole other thing. So now more than ever, once again, I don't want to give you the right answers, but I do want to teach you to ask the right questions. And oftentimes that means looking inward and going like, why do I believe what I believe? Where does this come from? What underlies this? So the reason why it's so important to me to address things like human rights and whether it be systemic racism, whether it be classism or nationalism, it's because I don't think there's another way to address it in a way that is going to work at this point in our culture and in Western culture in general. So how do we start these conversations? Because there's so many guide rails. There's so many, like, we don't talk about this. We're friends, but we don't talk about this. What if there was a way to talk about it? What if there was a way to explore it in a way that allowed you to kind of lower down your defensive mechanisms and actually have conversations? Because you're not going to change anyone's mind, but you might start to change people's hearts through those conversations, through the conversations created by reading something, by storytelling. So that's how and why, and the mission I've kind of taken on. I think we as storytellers have a responsibility. I kind of see it as there's rungs on a ladder of, what is the intention of storytelling? If it's just escapism at this bottom rung, like there's plenty of readers who will read just for escapism, and that's fine. And there's plenty of writers who write just for escapism. Also, it's great. And then above that, there's entertainment. Like, people want to create stories because they want to entertain people. They want to entertain themselves. Great. But once we start getting higher on that ladder, well, now we also have the ability to, teach, and above that, challenge. Yep. So if I can tell a story that challenges someone to confront their own belief system, right, wrong, or indifferent, whether it affirms or allows them the opportunity to question, why am I doing what I'm doing? Is this actually what I value? Because identity politics are everything right now, and they're usually wrapped up in a desire to protect, and it's built on scaffolding. And I think stories have the ability to get to the heart of it.
And I think that's really interesting, because something I've noticed a lot more in recent years is some people have to experience the hardship before they understand. And reading and telling stories gives them that kind of buffer. It's almost a simulation in a way. Yeah. Like, you're exposing them to different situations that, if they're able to, they can make those connections in real life because I honestly feel like a lot of times it has to do with who and what you're exposed to, can help shape. And you're right. Writing definitely has that ability to help expose them to other narratives and other hardships that they may not. That's awesome. Perfectly said. So that kind of ties into Divided Ruin Will Reign, and that's from The Ghost of Rhaenyra. So the story there emphasizes unity and collaboration over division. How do you use specifically the fantasy genre to convey that message of collective strength?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're so, once again, lowering inhibitions. People are so convinced of their identity politics, their cultural identity being their defining factor, and believing the lie that, well, we're just different. Let's agree to disagree, which is not really agreeing on anything.
Yeah,
there's a time to agree to disagree, but again, that's not what we're talking about here. I think specifically, the concept of, divided ruin will reign, but together tyranny falls. Like, the walls fall down if we're willing to have the hard conversations. Then we can actually address the problems in the room. Those big elephants that are just like sitting in the corner, taking up all the air and saying, well, don't talk about that. Don't talk about that. Like, you don't want us to talk about it, because that's how we solve the problem that you're creating. And I think that there are, like, sometimes I'll, whether I'll read a book or watch a movie, and I'll have like really strong feelings about it, and people will be like, it's just a movie. And I'm like, nothing's just anything in
No.
stories. Nothing is just anything. That's not how it works. If it, oh, well, I felt seen. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Now that you feel seen, what does that empower you to do?
Yep.
And if that question's followed up with this doughy-eyed kind of like, then it's a false empowerment. It's a pat on the head and going like, see, you're seen. I get it. I'm not going to do anything about it, but just sit down, shut up, and then we'll move on. And that's how we've been conditioned.
Yep.
And that's how powerful storytelling is. So if we can have messaging that does the opposite, that emboldens the audience to ask hard questions, reconcile differences, I think we are stronger, not in spite of our differences, but because of our differences. I think there's a really profound, there's life in collaboration. Nothing exists in isolation for very long and thrives. Eventually it wastes away, it devours itself, but it's through the collective. But that collective needs to be willing to challenge previously held beliefs. The problem with collective is that people of different think, well, I need mine. You have yours, I need mine. Don't take mine. I don't want mine to change. But what if that change was something better? Why do we hold on to that? And that it goes back to the why of me being an annoying kid. But I think I think stories like Ghosts of Rainier, it really takes it is a political story. Do we fight or do we flee from this tyrant? And I tell the story through the lens of two sisters, because the sister dynamic is something that's much more relatable than the big political zoomed out kind of, it's too much to wrap your head around. It just becomes well, I don't know. I don't know all the stuff that's going on. So then you shrug and you move on with the conversation. But if it's about people get people, at least enough, at least they're more willing to try. So if those two people at odds can represent bigger things, it can be a conversation starter. So packaging, big social intending messaging into like conversational, relational aspects of the human experience, it's relatable. It becomes more accessible. And I think that's the start. We need people at the table to hold conversations that are worth having. But if people think like, I don't need to have that conversation, or I don't want to have that conversation, we're never going to create betterment. We're never going to progress or grow or evolve. And I do think that, that is kind of the point. It's to grow and help others grow and better their lives. I do think that we could boil it all down to that.
Yeah. So it reminds me of a little bit of tension that was going around on Book Talk, maybe about a month and a half ago, where a woman said that, reading fiction, genre fiction is all well and good, but, actual fiction is the fruits and vegetables.
Yeah.
But to me, I have learned so much more from fantasy books than, because fantasy books allow you to take these things that are very mundane in our world and blow them up to monumental things. And I'm sorry, the last year I have never had so much emotional growth as I have when reading Brandon Sanderson. Because reading the Stormlight Archive, it puts you through it. And, all books have that potential to do. And if you're not able, it's not the genre's fault. It's you being able to, what's the message here? What am I, learning?
The intentionality behind it. And to your point, like Stormlight Archive was one of my huge inspirations. Like I love Brandon Sanderson's work. I love how he coaches, how he teaches, his BYU courses and whatnot. But, he asks questions. He wants to understand how do I impart something that's not my experience and do so authentically, put it on page and make it resonate with people who that is their authentic experience.
Yeah.
And that requires a degree of humility to be able to be like, I don't know this thing. I will never understand this thing. Can you help me? Mm-hmm. So taking that time, that energy, having those sensitivity readers that are helping in that regard, it's allowing for this connection, which has built a community that has continually uplifted one another through not the best times, you know? And I think what is more powerful than that? And these are just shapes on dead trees, and it's creating that, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's pictures in your mind from shapes on dead trees, and it's creating community. What's more powerful than that?
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. So reader reactions. Have you ever had, like, you know, there's the obvious interactions with readers, but have there ever been an interaction with a reader that surprised you, or a way that your books were interpreted that you had not maybe intended when you were writing it?
So, of course, I think there's the most common one that I've had where I look at myself and ask, could I have done this better? Or is this the state of, you know, we need to meet people where they're at, right? And I do think that, and I do hope that, like, going back to what I said earlier, if you get to the end of the story and you're like, I wanted this character to get owned, I wanted them to get their comeuppance, and I'm like, I get that, and I understand why you expect that, because we've been conditioned to want that.
Yeah.
I don't think that is the moral of the story. If you're still wanting vengeance on this character, even if they deserve it, you missed the thematic overtone that it will not give you anything. So an opportunity for mercy, for you to offer mercy, an opportunity for them to create redemption. So, like, there's definitely been, and like, people don't like a certain character ending. And I'm like, I get it. I understand why that is not what you are conditioned to want. I wouldn't change anything. Yeah. And I think that's something that, like, and this is something I talk about with, you know, the authors that I coach all the time. Like, are you okay with your story not being for everyone? And that's something it is hard to, you know, come to terms with, that some people are not going to get it. And especially, like, you know, studying moral reasoning and moral development. And if you're trying to have this really noble and principally driven concept driven home, but people are still thinking, like, selfishly, I want this thing. There's a gap that, until there's a degree of growth, they might not get yet. And I hope in time they might reread a story or read another story that helps fill in that gap. But if I riled up an emotional response, even if you didn't like it, I did something right.
Yep.
So even if you're not happy with what you got, I'm happy that you got something, because I built something enough that you cared about it to not like, because you wanted this. Well, now you have an opportunity to ask yourself, why didn't you like it? What about it? What is the thing that you wanted? And do you value that thing that you think you want? Now, a lot of this, that's not going to happen in a conversation I get to have with a reader. Probably not. But I think that's another thing that I've grown to be okay with. Like, I'm going to plant seeds and I may never get to see them grow. I might get a 3-star review. But you know, they read this story, and if it like, I've read some 3-star books where they stick with me and I continue to think about, and I've read some 5-star reads that once I close the book, I never think about again. What would I rather write? I'd rather write that 3-star book that pissed you off enough that you keep thinking about, if it creates challenging. Now, Do I want some of those 5-star reads? Yeah. But I think that I'm okay with those reader reactions, even though it's like, it's disappointing because there's a, oh, really? You still want the vengeance arc to fulfill itself? You don't want you don't want to believe that even people at their worst can still be better. Like, I want that for you, but not yet. And that's okay.
Mm. You make a good point, and it's a good segue into our next topic also. With, you have to be comfortable with your stuff not being for everyone. And I think that, and it's a very important message in marketing as well, is if you are writing to everyone, you're writing to no one. And, I see a lot of authors fall into that trap where they're like, well, this book's for everyone. No, absolutely. It's not for everyone. But as far as author coaching goes, what motivated you to take on kind of a mentorship role with other authors, and what common advice do you provide to new writers?
Sure. So I think I've always enjoyed teaching. When my degree, I was originally in school. So my degree is in exercise physiology, but I was a double major, and the plan was to do phys ed and ex-phys, and I wanted to coach. And the physical education ended up not happening. But then when I got into fitness, it was like, okay, I'm just going to take this. I'm going to mentor new trainers. And that was a big part of what I did for a long time before going off on my own. But it's still something that I really value. Even like in my relationship with my clients, I want to teach. It comes down to, I want to teach you how to fish. I don't want to just give you a fish. I want to teach you how to do it. I think that also, like, for myself, when I'm learning something new, I want to learn it well enough to teach it, because that helps me learn it better. So I think that there's an aspect of that. Like, I enjoy the aspects of coaching, and that's always been a part of me. So this just felt very natural to go into. But also in my writing process, I realized like how lonely it can be, and trying to find, I joined different writing groups and didn't really feel like they were for me. And I wanted to find a space, but the only spaces I could really find were the places where I was like paying for, I'm paying for a relationship with an editor, right?
Yeah.
And then they teach me because I'm paying them. So I wanted to create an environment where, yes, they're paying me, but they're getting to interact with others on that same journey. What's more important to me is them having each other. You're not here for me. Yes, you're coming and you're getting knowledge and applicable and structured ways to progress in your writing. But I think the real value is in the community aspect of, once again, divided ruin will reign, stronger together. Like these are just core beliefs that I have. Like, if you want to go fast, then yeah, go alone. But if you want to go far in anything, you kind of have to go together. I do think it takes I envision, like, the Canadian geese flying in a V, right? Like the person at the front, they're taking the worst of the draft and they cycle through. Someone's always at the front though, but it doesn't always have to be the same person. And I think when writers try to do it all themselves without the community, the propensity for burnout is just so high. So if you have a whole V of different birds cycling through, taking the lead, and you're all helping each other out, you're going to go farther. And so creating community, creating opportunities for community is just as ingrained within me as like the desire to teach and to coach. So it's, I would say, like, as kind of lumping the two together of, what advice do I offer and why do I do it? But it's the biggest advice is this is not something that you should do alone. You can, and you might go pretty fast and but you also might burn out.
Yeah.
And every author, like read a Brandon Sanderson book and look in the acknowledgments. They're like 3 pages long of people he wants to thank. And because that's how many people are on his team. And that goes all the way back to Elantris. It was never just him. He had his group, he had his beta readers, he had his editors. And I think that's not a lesson that I need to, that's not a lesson I encourage anyone to have to figure out for themselves. That like, I've burned out because I'm alone. So creating that. And then I would say the other thing is your second draft is always better than your first draft. So whether you're a plotter or a pantser, your second draft is always better than your first draft. Your third draft is usually better than your second draft, and so on and so on and so on. So I encourage people to fast draft. And what I mean by fast draft is I mean plotting. So if it takes me 500 words an hour to figure out my story, and my story is going to be 100,000 words, let's just keep the math easy. So I'm going to be spending 200 hours to figure out if my story works. That's a big investment to figure out, I want to start over. This isn't the story I actually want to tell. So the more different ways in which you present the story on page, whether it is, it's kind of, I created my own methodology that's, kind of takes from different things like the snowflake method of like start small, build. But I use what's called a spook statement. So a spook statement is situation, protagonist, objective, opponent or obstacle, and then the climax. So it's a 2-sentence statement that encapsulates the heart of your story. Before you start writing, you should have that 2-sentence statement. Now, if you have that 2-sentence statement, you feel good about it, great. Can you turn that into 7 to 10 sentences? And 7 to 10, that should kind of be like your, a 7-point plot. If you have that 7 to 10 sentences, and then you take that and you put it on a sheet of paper and you put in some connective tissue to make it work, well, there's your 1-page synopsis. And you're now on draft 4 before you've even written page 1, because 3 times now I've asked you to go through your story from beginning, middle, and end, a 2-sentence level, 10-sentence level, 1-page level. I think every time you go through this mental cycle of storytelling, you start to find what's most important, what's the part of this you want to tell, and you're able to tell it better because it's not your first time. So even for a discovery writer, there's certain aspects of your story that you should have figured out, and then you can explore the other areas deeper. So I think everyone deep down is a plotter. They just haven't found the way to plot that works for them. So finding your process. I don't know a single writer who is like, the first book was so easy, but the second book was so hard. I don't know anyone who that's their experience.
Yeah.
The first book is hard as hell because you're making all the mistakes. You're figuring it out as you go. You're shooting from the hip. But then the second book, you now have a system. You have a plan. At least you should. This is what worked for me the first time. And it doesn't mean it's going to work for every book, but you should at least know, okay, this won't work for me. And how many different ways to not make a light bulb before you kind of find, okay, this is how I make my light bulb. And I can just show up and do it. And I think that's the methodology that I try to teach, is the efficiency of storytelling based on knowing your own process. And I find that.
I think so. I'm a heavy plotter as well, and I kind of equate it to building a person. So it's like, you start out with the bones, and then you start out with the nervous system, and it really is very much going through it each time and kind of just fleshing it out, and it just becomes longer and longer until you can sit down and be like, okay, tomorrow is chapter 1. This is the story beats I want to hit, and then you can just kind of fly right through it effortless because you already know it.
Yeah.
No, and I love that about, I think that was a method taught in, it was a book that I read a while ago, like 5,000 words an hour or something like that. And it was very much, this is how you write faster. And it's just by knowing everything ahead of time. I think that method worked. It worked perfectly for me. So, but I'd
Begin
love to
with
hear
the end in mind, right?
Yep. Yeah. All right. So, I mean, we're wrapping up, but there are a couple things here. So upcoming projects, you do have a standalone prequel coming out. What new themes or perspectives do you hope to bring to your universe with this release?
So, yes, it's entitled Boon Blessed. It is a well, wait, are we talking about this one? Ghost of Rainier is already out. So Ghosts of Rainier is a standalone prequel. I do have another prequel in the works that will be a trilogy, but it will also stand alone from the series. If you have read, you'll figure out like, oh, this is this character. Oh, this is that thing that happened historically. There's like little Easter eggs, but you don't need that context in order to enjoy it. So that story is entitled Boon Blessed. And the aspect of, the human condition that I really wanted to explore with this one is codependent relationships and the impact that they have on fostering a negative self-image and therefore the self-limiting beliefs and the overcoming journey to through that. And that kind of takes place in a world where the water levels are rising and the beasts of the world are almost gaining sentience and hunting humanity. And this is driven by the god of beasts. So this whole concept of the story was again, I wanted to, similar to in Ghosts of Rainier, how if I want to tell the story of a complex issue of overcoming tyranny, okay, I'm going to tell it through the lens of a sister-sister relationship. This is, the world is dying and different countries are not getting along, but the world is dying, and we're fighting over the wrong things. So how does one person dealing with their self-limiting beliefs, A, overcome that, but B, gain the self-confidence and the allow themselves the voice at the table to really say the hard truths that other people aren't willing to hear because they're not willing to overcome their own self-limiting beliefs.
Right.
So I think, we talk about, having a plan and having a structure of how I'm going to go about doing things. I want to tell hard stories through a personal lens, and then thematically weave them together. So I think people suffering in codependent relationships, it feels like the world's dying. And they don't know why, because they need the thing. They need that person that they're dependent on. But they don't know what to do about it because that's also the very thing that's killing them. So overcoming that on an individual basis and then applying that to a macro structure of, well, imagine society being in this codependent, violent relationship, between countries. I need you to justify my control over my people. You need me to justify your control over your people. And it's living out this codependent relationship on a macro scale. Meanwhile, the country's dying.
Yeah.
The world.
Sounds like it's going to be an awesome read. But it does take place in the same universe as Eventual Realm. Is it the same world or? Awesome.
Yes. So same world, geographically different part of the world. There's a couple, and then a different period of time. So the god system overlaps, and one of the immortal characters between overlaps, but otherwise it's like a whole new cast and it feels like a whole new world because it's a different geographic part of the world.
Mhm.
But like there's an aspect of the historical context of a Vengeful Realm where you'll be like, oh, I remember when this was talked about very briefly. Like,
Yep.
so I'm really looking forward to exploring that and exploring that deeper. The first book is drafted, it's an editing process, and really looking forward to getting that out. In addition to that, I have a couple short stories in the works, a couple anthologies that I'm participating in that will be coming out this year. So that's been really fun. Short stories are very difficult for me because I like I like to write big. So it's definitely challenging a different aspect of storytelling, which has been a lot of fun, very interesting, very challenging. It's like, what is my word count limit? It's 10,000. Are you sure? But getting better at that.
But that's not the only projects. You have a board game inspired by your series that you're working on. So I guess, what do you think are the challenges to translating your works into that format? But also, I guess that there's probably a bit of benefit as well. Looking at it from a different lens maybe can help strengthen your writing.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I feel like the board game that I created kind of sat in a weird place between a board game and a tabletop game, like a TTRPG. And that kind of blend, I'm in the process of reworking because I feel like, once again, if you're appealing to everyone, you're appealing to no one. So I want to kind of separate those two things, but I feel like not this story, not that story, but I have another story concept in the works that I think would lend itself better. So I'm almost using the board game concept to drive how this story would be. So I think it would actually fit better into this world. Again, it's still connected to everything that I've done, but it's a little looser in that connection. So it gives me a little bit more freedom to adapt and create what I want to create. So that is translating to a different medium is always difficult, especially since board games are not necessarily intended to tell stories. TTRPGs, sure, yeah, it's definitely interactive storytelling, but board games not so much. So creating those dynamics, it's just like it's flexing different muscles, it's learning a different system, and that's always fun. But time is always the limiting factor.
So, okay. Sorry, my mind just kind of scrambled a little bit. So wrapping it up, we have your legacy and impact. So what do you want to see, or what would you like to leave as a lasting impact on the fantasy genre?
So I think there's a huge rise in like the dark fantasy genre, where you had the Song of Ice and Fires, you had the Mark Lawrences, you had the Joe Abercrombies, and a lot of people picking up where they left off. And then amidst that, there's also been this huge rise in cozy fantasy and noble bright fantasy, which has, like, sometimes they often harken back to more classic vibes. And to me, the nihilism that's over here and the hesitance to go to the dark areas that exists over here has left me searching for that middle ground, where I hope that my writing style inspires readers who are willing to go into the dark areas, to bring their readers into the dark areas, but also show hope through that darkness. I don't want to leave my readers in the dark. That's not my worldview, that like people never change and everything's going to hell. It doesn't reflect my worldview. And so reading some of those books left me feeling like, yeah, this was a good story, or it was a good read, or I was entertained, or I liked these characters, but the lasting breath, the dying breath of the story is death. I don't want that to be what I'm giving my readers. So I want them to, like, quite literally, like my publishing company is called First Torch Books. I want to inspire my readers to grab a torch of their own and charge into the darkness, and be willing to bring other people through that darkness by casting their own light. So if I can do that for readers, if I can do that for other writers, I think that would be that'd be great. That would be the impact I hope to create and achieve. And then secondarily, more on the business side of it, I think the publishing industry has a tremendous amount of inefficiencies, a tremendous amount of wear and tear on the most important part of the storytelling pipeline, and that's creators. There's like, the data shows the number of authors who write one book is like sky high, and then the number of authors who write, more than 3 books, there's a tremendous drop off. And then the number of authors who write, 5 to 7 books, another tremendous drop off. People are having a hard time creating careers because of the burnout that the wear and tear of the publishing industry intends to impose. So if I can figure out my journey, I think like now more than ever, leveraging community and leveraging, crowdfunding, there's an opportunity to, hey, these are the types of stories I want to tell. If you're telling stories that resonate with this ideology of, going into the darkness, leading others through, finding hope at the end, why not, like, me leverage, like, hey, if you like my stories, I'd love to have the community and the fan base to be like, if you love my stories, this is an author that I've been working with, and this is their mission and their story, and I think you're going to love it. And then help them to like jumpstart, so they're not having to do all the the hard work of finding their audience. The audience is built for them. So I feel like publishing companies, they're publishing what will sell now because it makes money now. But it doesn't necessarily build trust or predictability with what emotional resonance will this story give me? And I feel like that's not even talked about. And that's probably the most important part of marketing. What am I going to feel when I read this? Right.
Yeah.
So I would like to create a different type of crowdsourced, community driven publishing company that uplifts authors, that have stories that uplift readers.